Come on, everyone. Because everyone will be moaning if we finish late. So unless we start now, that's okay. Well done. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We need 3 more. 2. 5. 8, 9. Yep, we're fine. So warm welcome to our Office of the Auditor General. It's good to have you here, and you can see we're taking this pretty seriously, as we should. So, Catherine, I don't know if you wanted to make any introductory remarks, or should we just crack into it?
We'll just crack into it, but I do want to welcome Sarah Lineman, who will be familiar to a lot of elected members here, who deals with Auckland Council local government matters, and Jonathan Keats, who's a long-standing member of the office, who deals both in a legal context and in substantive matters across the office in the local government context as well. So hand over to the two of you.
Okay, good afternoon. Just to continue from what Catherine has said, my name's Sarah Lynham. I'm the Sector Manager for Auckland Council, so have been here on a number of occasions, and Jonathan is also in the local government team and is the Senior Solicitor at the office. We're here today because we understand the importance of the process that you're going into, and we want to make sure that we can make clear to you the support and guidance that our office is able to offer. And we have a shared interest, obviously, in decision making being made on a good foundation, strong basis. So Jonathan is going to take you through some of our guidance material. Part of it has been covered already this afternoon, and we're happy to take questions as we go and at the end as well.
Okay. So acknowledging that we've sort of gone through quite a big chunk of the stuff already.
Yes, so there might be a bit of repetition, but I guess it's good to reinforce some of the messages that you've heard from Catherine. So I'm going to run through our guidance on managing conflicts of interest with a focus on financial interests, because that's where we have the statutory role under the Local Authorities Members' Interest Act. And the focus will be on just a reminder of what the rules are on the Act, but how the Act might help, and how the Act does have some mechanisms that might be able to assist to manage financial conflicts of interest if there are any that are significant and do need to be managed in the context of the unitary plan discussions. So basically our definition of conflicts of interest is where two different interests intersect, and where your duties as a member of the council could be in conflict or could be affected by some other interest or duty you have, whether that's a personal interest or whether it's a duty because you're part of another organisation such as a trust. And as Catherine pointed out, and is clear from our guidance, conflicts of interest are inevitable when people are in public office. They often have a lot of interests in the community as well. They're not necessarily a problem, but they can cause problems if they are not carefully managed, and they can create legal risk to council decision making. So for local authority members, there are these two main aspects. Financial interests are regulated by statute, by the Local Authorities Members' Interest Act, 1968. And non-financial interests are regulated by the common law rules about bias and procedural fairness. And these are the matters that Catherine referred to: predetermination and bias that can be perceived based on relationships. And why it matters in terms of why do councillors need to properly manage conflict of interest? That members of the public have very high expectations of good decision making made with integrity, impartiality and transparency and fairness. Poor management of conflicts creates reputational risks both for the council and for individuals. There could be a legal risk and associated cost if decisions are challenged through judicial review. And in terms of financial interests, is, under the Members' Interest Act, it's a criminal offence to take part in discussing and voting on a matter where you have a financial interest. So that is different and more serious than a non-financial conflict of interest in terms of a personal liability and criminal offence. So the Auditor General has a role under the Members' Interest Act and has had for a long time of investigating and, if necessary, prosecuting potential breaches of the Act. And we can also consider applications for exemptions from the rules in the Act and declarations. So, as I said, there are some procedures in the Act that can help to manage conflicts of interest. We issued general guidance on the Act. Catherine has taken you through some of that. And generally, from time to time, we call for reform of the Act because in many respects it is very old and outdated. That hasn't been picked up as a priority for government yet. There hasn't really been a strong call from the local government sector for reform, but that would be something that we think the Act is very old, it's poorly worded in some aspects, and it is overdue for reform. On the other hand, it does have some useful things, and I think, as I explain how it might apply in this situation, there are still some good features in the Act. In terms of non-financial interests, we don't have the same statutory role, but as part of our mandate to do inquiries into how councils use their resources or to consider issues of probity, we do sometimes inquire into non-financial conflicts of interest. And our guidance does give some broad guidance in that area as well. In terms of the rules in the Act, there are two main aspects. The main one is the prohibition on discussing and voting on any matter where a member has a financial interest, and that is at a meeting of the council or of a committee of the council, unless that interest is in common with the public. So if a member does have a financial interest and discusses or votes on a matter in which they have that interest, it's a criminal offence and they could be prosecuted and lose their office, although that is very rare. There's also a transparency requirement, so if a member does have a financial interest, they are required to declare it at the meeting, and that declaration has to be minuted. The other main aspect I'll talk about is the exemptions that are available under the Act where a member does have a financial interest. So in terms of the general things to think about when a matter is coming up for discussion and voting, you need to focus on what is the matter that is going to be discussed. Is it, the Act applies to, if you have a financial interest, you need to think, what is the matter that has been discussed or voted on that I might have that interest in? And the rule applies not just to voting, but also to discussion. Then you work out whether you have a financial interest in that matter, and the test that we apply for financial interest is whether, if the matter is decided in a particular way, you would have a reasonable expectation of either a gain or a loss of money arising from that decision being made.
Is that personal gain of loss?
Personal, yeah.
Loss or
personal
gain.
Financial effect.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Positive or negative. You then need to think about, is the interest in the common?
In that respect, could you mention then Debbie Hewitt of the Hawkesbury Regional Council and the Rui Taniwha Dam, who did have a financial interest, but your office said she was allowed to vote?
Yeah. I'll cover that when we get to the declaration.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is, basically that's an example of how the Act can work in that situation. So then, you work out, is the interest in common with the public? Because if it is, then the prohibition doesn't apply. And then you think about, do any of the other exemptions in the Act apply, or could I apply for approval in advance of the vote to participate, notwithstanding that I have a financial interest? And that's the Councillor Hewitt situation, which I'll talk about in a bit. In terms of the decision that's been made, it's important to think about what sort of decision is it. So the Act is more likely to apply where the decision is a substantive one and less so if it's a procedural one. So a member is unlikely to have a financial interest in a decision to consult the public on a proposal, but if the decision is about the outcome of consultation and a proposal to do something, then the financial interest is more likely to arise. So I guess in the context of the unitary plan, it is going to be substantive matters, not procedural matters that you will be having to decide. So basically, yeah, it's very important to focus on the nature of the decisions that are being made and then think about, do I have a financial interest in any of those particular matters? The Act covers both direct and indirect financial interests. So a direct interest is one that would be held by the member personally, and it might be through, for example, through owning property. So a decision might have an impact on the value of that property. A member could also have indirect interests, and Catherine mentioned in response to a question that a member could have a financial interest through ownership or involvement in a company. And the Act has a series of rules that says if a member's interest in a company is over certain thresholds, such as a 10% shareholding or the managing director of the company, then they are deemed to have an interest in a matter if the company has a financial interest. An indirect interest can also arise if the member's spouse or partner has a direct financial interest, and then in that case the Act deems the member to share that financial interest. In terms of the interest in common with the public, so the prohibition against discussion and voting only applies if the interest is one that is not shared in common with the public. So to determine whether it's in common with the public, you need to work out, do other people have the same sort of interest that I have in this decision? And if so, is it of the same kind and size and extent? And how many of those people are there? An interest doesn't have to be shared with every single member of the public, but it has to be a decent size group for it to meet that in common with the public test. Catherine referred to some of the work that we did in the Environment Canterbury Members' Interest Inquiry, where we did make some comments about interest in the public, and there is some guidance there to help work out when the size of the group might be big enough to qualify for in public with the interest in common with the public. So basically, a rating decision, which is a broad rating policy decision, will be one that will affect a lot of people. A decision on a small targeted rate that just might affect a small number of people will be not necessarily in common with the public. And often people give the example of dog control decisions that might, dog licensing fees. Well, enough people own dogs for that to be in common with the public. But if it was something about a permit that only a small number of people have, then it's not in common with the public. Other examples, reasonably common examples of interest not in common with the public are a property developer's interest in planning matters and things like development contributions, because they are affected to a much greater degree than your ordinary residential homeowner. And as I said, if you're one of a small group affected by a targeted rate, that won't be in common with the public. There is a somewhat outdated exemption in the Act for district planning matters that we're not fully confident that this applies to the Auckland Unitary Plan. It's not, if you look at the wording, it was written in the days of the Town and Country Planning Act, and it was written in relation to the preparation, recommendation, approval or review of a district scheme under that Act. The wording has been updated to refer to a district plan under the RMA. So basically the policy of this is that if the council is considering adopting the district plan or reviewing the district plan, so making a significant decision that affects the whole plan, then the prohibition against discussion and voting doesn't apply. But if it is just deciding a matter that relates to a variation or a plan change, so it's part of the plan, or a resource consent, then the prohibition still applies. It's a bit unclear as how you would read this provision as related. It doesn't address a regional council or a unitary authority adopting a unitary plan. So whether this applies will come down to, it's hard to work out until we see what the plan looks like, whether it could be just, whether district plan parts could be separated and distinguished from the whole. So I guess general thought is it would be unsafe to rely on this exemption at this point. In terms of other exemption abilities in the Act, there's basically, the law is not concerned with de minimis or trifling matters, so if it's a very small financial interest, the member can apply to the Auditor General for an exemption that their interest is so insignificant or it's remote that they should be able to take part. And remote meaning several other events would need to happen before the interest might arise in the future. And insignificant is basically financially insignificant to that member given their financial situation. This is, it's not used all that often, this exemption, but it is available, and it does require the member to make, or the council on their behalf, to apply in writing before the decision has been made, and we would need to be very clear on what the decision, what the financial interest is, and what the decision is, and the member would need to make the case as to why their interest was so remote or insignificant that it wasn't going to influence their participation in that matter.